Southwest of the Vegas Strip, hidden beneath a remote parking lot, Vault-Tec conducted one of their most simple and yet most devious vault experiments. I'm the Resolute Cartographer, and this is the story of Vault 19. When the residents of Vault 19 arrived at their vault on the day of the bombs, they descended through the parking lot sewer manway and walked through the vault door. Once inside, they were split into two separate populations, red and blue. While they would share common areas like the mess hall, infirmary, and atrium, they had their own living quarters, and more remarkably, each group had its own overseer. These two overseers oversaw their own population and had no authority over the other's population. The day-to-day operation of the vault appears to have started off fairly normally, with the only difference between 19 and its sibling vaults being that the population would break in two every evening and go their separate ways. Over time, the dwellers began to suspect there was something wrong with their vault. Some reported hearing voices over the intercom. Others believed that there was a strange gas being pumped into the rooms via the air vents. Most didn't trust the residents of the opposite faction. When some of the blue faction began to believe that the doctor was drugging them, they attempted to take control of the clinic so that they could check her records. They were rebuffed by security, but the incident was witnessed by the red faction. From then on, the red faction came to view the doctor as an ally of the blue faction and feared that she would poison them. Paranoia spread through the vault, and there were even fears of spies from the opposite faction. When one member of the blue faction opened a bottle of Sunset Sarsaparilla and found the blue star marking every Sunset Sarsaparilla star bottle cap, they feared that the star meant that they had been marked by the red faction for something. Unfortunately for the residents of Vault 19, their vault was one of Vault-Tec's societal experiment vaults, and the experiment was working incredibly well. The goal of this experiment was to create as much paranoia as possible without violence or chemical methods. The simple act of segregating the population and marking one half as red and the other half as blue was eventually enough to drive people into a hysterical frenzy. Though we don't know when, the water purification filters began to fail, driving even more paranoia. It seems likely that this was the final straw that drove the evacuation of the vault. Because we don't find any skeletons in the vault, I feel confident that the experiment ended in an evacuation rather than in some sort of purge. After this evacuation, the vault would lie vacant for around 2 centuries before events in the outside world would provide a new set of tenants. In 2271, the new California Republic began to expand into the Mojave Wasteland. Over the next decade, the Republic worked to establish order within the territory, sending much of their military into the desert. Their troops were supplied by Brahmin caravans and military convoys, but they had plans for something better: a train. They began to construct a new rail line running along I-15 that would create a much more stable and swift means of transporting troops and supplies to and from the Mojave. The NCR decided to construct this rail line with prison labor, and soon convicts from across the Republic arrived. To hold these prisoners when they weren't working, the NCR repurposed an old prison outside Primm, renaming it the New California Republic Correctional Facility, or NCRCF. This arrangement worked until September 2281, when the inmates used stolen dynamite and weapons to take over the prison. Having renamed themselves the Powder Gangers, many of these inmates decided to stay close to the NCRCF and use it as a base of operations. In terms of those who chose to leave, some ventured south to assault Primm, while others headed northwest, desperate to stay out of the hands of the NCR. At the head of this northbound party was Samuel Cook, the mastermind of the taking of the NCRCF. Cook was a native of the Mojave and hated the encroachment of the NCR. He had once been a partisan, attacking their caravans and generally making life difficult for the people he viewed as invaders. Upon his escape from custody, he wanted to evade their forces and return to his previous occupation of making war on the NCR. He found the best place to do this to be Vault 19. The land around Vault 19 was very dangerous. To the southeast, the death claws around Sloan made the highway nigh unpassable. To the west, cazadores infested the fake ghost town of Bonnie Springs. The raiders known as the Fiends had taken control of the nearby Vault 3 to the north, while the Great Khans occupied the canyon lands to the northwest. All these dangers kept Vault 19 generally safe from NCR operatives. Vault 19 didn't just offer the Powder Gangers safety though, it also sat on a sulfur deposit that Samuel Cook intended to use to create explosives with which to fight the NCR. There was just one problem with this sulfur deposit: it was guarded. In the years since the bombs, the cave that held the sulfur deposits had been infested with fire geckos, and more recently, night stalkers. The fire geckos had even managed to dig their way into the vault, effectively destroying the lower levels. With the sulfur unattainable inside and the NCR hunting them outside, the Powder Gangers were stuck without a good path forward. With inaction, there came disloyalty, and a second leader emerged in Cook's Powder Gangers, Philip Lim. While Cook sought war with the NCR, Lim wanted to surrender to the NCR and hope for mercy. In a strange mirroring of past events, the leadership of the population split, and Samuel Cook set himself up in the Red Sector Overseer's office, while Lim set himself up in the Blue Sector Overseer's office. When the courier arrived at the vault in late 2281, both Cook and Lim sought their support. Because there's no canonical outcome to these events, I'll detail the 4 possible outcomes. Option 1, siding with Samuel Cook. Upon arriving at Vault 19, the courier spoke with Samuel Cook. Convinced to help the Powdergangers make war on the NCR, the courier descended into the depths of the vault and laid waste to the fire gecko population, granting the escaped convicts access to the massive deposit of sulfur. Once this was complete, at the behest of Samuel Cook, the courier traveled to Red Rock Canyon to speak with Papa Khan, the head of the Great Khans. Papa Khan agreed to allow the Powdergangers to join the Great Khans. The escaped convicts then left the vault and headed for Red Rock Canyon, aside from Philip Lim, who was slain by Samuel Cook. Option 2, siding with Philip Lim, version 1. Upon arriving at Vault 19, the courier spoke with Philip Lim. Convinced to help Lim get the Powdergangers out of the vault, the courier descended into the depths of the vault and blew the massive deposit of sulfur. Once this was complete, the courier convinced Lim to seek entry into the Great Khans. The courier then traveled to Red Rock Canyon to speak with Papa Khan, the head of the Great Khans. Papa Khan agreed to allow the Powdergangers to join the Great Khans. The escaped convicts then left the vault and headed for Red Rock Canyon. Option 3, siding with Philip Lim, version 2. Upon arriving at Vault 19, the courier spoke with Philip Lim. Convinced to help Lim get the Powdergangers out of the vault, the courier descended into the depths of the vault and blew the massive deposit of sulfur. Once this was complete, the courier convinced Lim that his plan to surrender to the NCR was the right thing to do. The escaped convicts then left the vault and surrendered to the NCR. Option 4, the wild card. Superficially siding with either Samuel Cook or Philip Lim, the courier descended into the depths of the vault and detonated a massive quantity of C4, destroying the vault and killing everyone inside at the time. That about does it for the narrative, but I do have a few notes on this content before closing things out. First, let me start by saying that all the lore I detailed on the original vault occupants comes from a dozen terminal entries and 5 patient records. There are no names given in any of these entries. Residents are only identifiable by title or patient number. Along with this, most of the typical messages from Vault-Tec to the administrative staff have been lost to data corruption. So most of the information we have on the experiment comes from one partially corrupted terminal entry. If you felt I was being intentionally vague, I was not. I was doing what I could with what I had. I had to make small inferences here and there, such as the onboarding procedure, with the residents splitting into 2 factions as they were admitted. But I based these on how the other vaults operated, such as Vault 75. In the case of Vault 75, where the experiment required the testing of growing children, the adults were completely unnecessary, and as such, the parents of the child dwellers were separated from their children on entry and executed. Second, this is one of the more interesting vault experiments because of its realism. The goal here was to induce paranoia through non-violent, non-chemical means, and they achieved that. They didn't have to rely on some wacky sci-fi methods to reach their ends, they did it with simple us versus them psychology. The impression I get is that Vault-Tec took the normal population of one vault and split it in half. While a united population of the same size would normally live and work together without issue, dividing the population and giving each group its own overseer and living quarters created a factionalism that eventually destroyed the vault. While the blue faction had access to an area of the vault that the red faction didn't, it appears to me that there was no more sinister angle to this decision than to create more paranoia. Third, there was a little bit of cut content here that would reinforce and expand upon the previous point were it canonical. While we have access to the blue overseer's terminal, the red overseer's terminal is non-functional. The 2 entries planned for that terminal line up with the existing lore, so I don't really know why they were cut, but effectively the entries just show that even the overseers of each faction were unaware of what the other side was up to. The red overseer was completely unaware that the blue overseer's office had an elevator with access to the reactor level. By segregating the vault up through the overseer position, Vault-Tec ensured paranoia from top to bottom. Fourth, on the topic of the reactor level access for the blue faction, there's no reason given as to why blue had the exclusive access to the reactor level, nor why the red overseer didn't question their lack of access to the reactors. From all appearances, there was nothing on the reactor level that was meant to affect the vault above. I think it was simply something known only to blue to make their overseer feel superior to the red overseer, as though they were the true overseer or something like that. If there were more notes or terminal entries, perhaps more information could be gleaned on what exactly it was that was happening on the reactor level. Along with this, when it comes to the water filters failing, I see two possibilities here. A, they were actually fine, and the message regarding their status was meant to gin up more paranoia, or B, the high sulfur content in the ground was ruining the filters. I wouldn't be surprised to find either to be true. Fifth, there are actually two entrances to Vault 19, the front entrance and the sulfur cave entrance. While I suspect the front entrance is more likely to be found first, the sulfur cave entrance can grant access to the lowest levels of the vault, and with a high enough lockpicking skill, the upper levels as well. I do want to note here that the part of the cave near this entrance is infested with deadly night stalkers, so unless you're ready for them, it's probably better to come in the front. Regardless of which entrance you choose, should you blow the sulfur deposit, the cave entrance will become inaccessible, and should you blow the entire vault, both are inaccessible. Sixth, while lore-wise the escaped convicts in Vault 19 are powder gangers, they belong to a separate faction when it comes to gameplay. Because of this separation, the events surrounding your interactions with the other powder gangers will have no effect on your interactions with the powder gangers of Vault 19. This is similar to how the powder gangers in Prim are their own faction despite being nominally connected to the NCRCF powder gangers. On this same note, if you're not friends with the regular powder gangers, watch out for Whitaker Farmstead, which is a standard powder ganger outpost. Seventh, it's possible to work for both Samuel Cook and Philip Lim. You can accept the missions from both leaders and get both the red and blue keycards. You can even kill all the fire geckos, completing that objective, and then blow the caves, an option that yields an angry response from Samuel Cook. Eighth, Samuel Cook is an interesting figure in terms of what he represents. While the NCR undoubtedly views him as a terrorist, he views himself as a freedom fighter, attempting to keep the NCR from annexing his home. Lastly, I searched for hidden meaning where I could in this content, but it's blatant in its themes. The terminal password for the Blue Overseer's access to the reactor level was Hyacinth. While I'd hoped there was something paranoia related to hyacinths or the figure in Greek mythology Hyacinth, I think the only connection here is that it's a blue flower that served as the Blue Overseer's terminal password. As for the overall theme of the vault, the connection between a red faction and a blue faction sharing one space and letting the us versus them paradigm create paranoia feels like an obvious homage to the modern American political landscape. Alright, I think that'll do it for the story of Vault 19. If you want to receive notifications when I launch lore videos, you can follow me on Twitter at GamingWithMaps. If you appreciate what I do here and you want to support the channel financially, you can become a patron with Patreon. I want to thank my patrons Mesothelioma, 76 of Texas, Jill AWS, Dark Malcontent of Metaverse Studios, Brian, Real76, Dr. Orion, and Samsung Smart Fridge for their support. This has been the Irresolute Cartographer. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.